So hello again, everyone, for joining us. My name is Relina Joseph. I'm a professor in the communication department at University of Washington, Seattle campus. And I'm also the Associate Dean of Equity and Justice in the Graduate School. But my main job that I'm representing here today, I have many jobs, is I direct the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity. And the CCDE is really thrilled to be here joining with the University of Washington's Resilience Lab that you're going to hear about in just a minute from Director Megan Kennedy. This is our 7th annual conference, and this is our second or third year doing these online, and we really appreciate you all for being here today. I'm going to begin with my visual description. And to learn more about this practice, you'll hear all of our speakers providing a visual description. Josh, who's the Program Operations Manager for the CCDE, is going to drop in a link of if you're interested to learn more about this practice. But for our blind and visually impaired participants, I am a cisgender, mixed race, light brown skinned woman in my 40s with straightened brown hair. And before I hand this over to Megan, I wanted to really express so much gratitude to our organizing teams. This was truly a joint effort of love. We have so many folks, most of who you're going to hear from today, but many of whom you won't, who have been doing all kinds of hard work for this program, from UAA, from the CCDE, from the Resilience Lab, and we truly could not have done this work without them. We also here at the CCDE, this is our 7th conference and our first one that's in collaboration with the Resilience Lab, hopefully the first, not the last. And we came together this academic year, beginning of last year, really, because we saw that each of our centers brought some strengths and some needs that our other centers needed. So the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity is an anti-racist space. We do community programs. We have a very active research agenda. We have curriculum, and we've been doing a program that's called Interrupting Privilege. That's a intergenerational racial dialoguing program that has both intra-racial and interracial components. And our folks have been doing that for a while. And over the last couple of years, over our dual pandemics, and in particular in the process that our research assistant, Jazz Moultrie, who you're going to hear from later today, teamed our Quarantining While Black project, we kept on hearing about these experiences of racial exhaustion. And so while people were working hard to fight inequalities, intersectional inequalities, they were feeling like they were incredibly depleted in this process. And so we wanted to think about how we could partner up with experts on how to really address that depletion. And that meant my wonderful co-facilitator and co-partner in this endeavor, Megan Kennedy.
Thank you, Relina. Everyone, my name is Megan Kennedy and I use she, her pronouns. And I also want to start with a visual description. I am a white, queer, fairly androgynous person, also in my 40s. I have short hair, light eyes, and today I'm wearing a tan colored shirt, button up to the top as usual, with a layered dark navy denim jacket. I want to share a little bit about the Resilience Lab. The Resilience Lab is located within undergraduate academic affairs, and we support our undergraduate community at the UW, as well as our graduate students in the 3 campuses. So our work transcends that of UAA, but that's where we're housed in. And typically we are in Mary Gates Hall on the 2nd floor, and we welcome visitors. Our team is small, and we're mostly comprised of undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral level students who are extremely committed to supporting the well-being of the university and the community at large. We see our work developing in supporting community well-being and mental health as deeply interconnected with racial justice. We see them as the same. And we've really shifted our focus from over the years. Really, in 2019, we made a very deliberate decision as a team. We were in our suite, in conversation with each other, about how do we move from these old notions of resilience around supporting individuals with coping with stress effectively to understanding that it's not enough to ask people to breathe through the stress and the oppression and the racism that exists, but rather we need to be impacting the culture and the climate and the systems that are perpetuating that stress and oppression and racism to begin with. And so our work is very much focused on this deep interconnectedness between racial justice and well-being and mental health. We understand that, we also believe there's a set of practices that help support our resilience that can be really effectively used in racial justice work and racial dialogue. And that's what brought us together with CCDE to talk about that intersection and how we could work together toward this kind of common vision and outcomes that we have for our communities. And so just really honored that we have been able to collaborate so deeply with the CCDE team this year and bring all the other folks who you'll hear from today who will be leading practices and leading dialogues into this community. And we appreciate all of you being here.
Thank you, Megan. So we want to have a land acknowledgement here as well. We acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, the Tlilip, the Muckleshoot, and also the Duwamish nations. And we want to say that in this land acknowledgement, that our centers strive in our everyday practices, from our teaching to our community work to our purchasing power, to not just have this land acknowledgement be performative, but something that actually guides our everyday practices.
I want to acknowledge our sponsors for whom we're really grateful, starting with the Mind and Life Institute. The Mind and Life Institute awarded us funds to bring together a think tank, which involves community members from the UW campus and beyond who are helping us think about these themes of resistance and resilience this year. I also want to acknowledge the Department of Communication, the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity, the Resilience Lab, and Undergraduate Academic Affairs, and the UW Diversity and Inclusion Seed Grant this year. All of these sponsors helped make this conference possible and other work that we've been able to do this year possible, as well as a lot of individual donations. I mean, thousands of dollars of individual donations that poured in from all of you who have attended either this conference or who attended former conversations with Dr. Bonnie Duran and Rhonda McGee earlier this year. We're grateful for you and thank you. So let me talk a little bit about the structure for this morning's session. Here's how this is going to work. Relina's going to start by providing an overview of radical listening to do some level setting around this idea of radical listening. And then we've invited Marie Angelus, who's a friend and colleague from the University of Washington's Evans School, to lead us in an opening grounding practice. Then we're going to listen to two sets of dialogues regarding the theme of resistance and resilience using this process of radical listening. And we'll transition, and Kuan will lead us in another practice that supports his resilience and resistance on a daily basis. And then we'll turn to another dialogue on the theme, and the morning session wraps up at 12. So what you hear there is that we will be transitioning between learning about radical listening, having opportunities to listen to these dialogues, and integrating these practices that folks want to share with us that support their resistance and resilience throughout. So that's what we have planned for this morning. And we will start hearing a little bit more about radical listening, but first I want to talk a little bit about the norms for the space. And before that, I just want to take a moment and back up even further and just talk about kind of coming into this space this morning. Here we are, Wednesday morning, and we're in the wake of the racist violence perpetuated in Buffalo in the name of white supremacy. And we've gathered today to have a conference about resistance and resilience. And I feel like, on one hand, I feel incredibly grateful to be able to gather today and be in community with all of you, and to be able to sit together, be in this conversation together, and think about what types of practices can fortify us in moments just like this, and to learn from each other, and to listen to each other, and to be present with how we're feeling and how others are feeling. On the other hand, all of us are going to be processing the violence and the realities of white supremacy different today. And it may be that the purpose of this conference in and of itself is just to bring awareness to how we're doing. And so over the next 2 days, during this morning session, afternoon session, tomorrow evening session, we want you to check in with yourself on how you're doing, and make sure you're taking care of yourself and taking care of others. So for example, throughout the sessions, as we invite you to participate in practices, if that doesn't feel like what you need right now, we want you to just acknowledge that's not what you need right now, and maybe it's just about observing and listening. If you feel like you wanted to be here, but this isn't the place that's feeling supportive or nourishing right now, we invite you to listen to that need too. We invite you to do what you have bandwidth for. And I think it's important for me to also just invite you to reach out to any of us as organizers if there's additional resources or supports that you need at this time, and that we're here to be in community with all of you. There's resources that we can provide, and if the resources that you look around and find aren't what you're looking for, we want to be in solidarity and finding resources that do feel supportive and nourishing. And then, you know, there's a set of norms around like how are we to be with each other in this type of space, and maintaining mindful awareness may be like the one norm that sort of is sort of the theme of this whole kind of set of sessions that we've curated over the next 2 days, about just paying attention to what thoughts or feelings or sensations are coming up for you in the present moment, paying attention to what's coming up for you and what you need. And in doing so, it allows us to engage in the theme of radical listening, which Relina will explain in more depth. But part of the components of radical listening are being able to listen in a way where you're able to seek understanding and not to argue. So sometimes when we're listening to another person, we have all these automatic thoughts that show up, you know, things that we want to say and automatic things that we want to get across. And today we're hoping that we can take that space or that pause between our automatic responses to be able to really seek and check in. Have I really listened to understand and understand this person's perspective before I'm coming in with my own? Another norm is around speaking your truth and hearing other people's truth. And we understand that this doesn't come without some discomfort. It can be uncomfortable to speak one's truth and uncomfortable to hear another's. And again, the ability to use different strategies to be able to be attuned to what emotions and thoughts and feelings are coming up for you as you listen to other people's truth and speak your own is something that we're hoping to support everyone with. Staying engaged and experiencing discomfort. Part of this, in my experience last year attending CCDE's conference, Quarantining While Black, in order to stay engaged and experience discomfort, I found myself just taking notes, like how am I experiencing things right now? And just maintaining a mindful awareness of my own presence and experience during the sessions. As I listen to people, how can I observe what's happening for me? What am I thinking about? What am I feeling? Am I feeling anything? Am I getting distracted? What's distracting me and why? Just asking yourself to observe. If anything, if you could just observe how your presence is, that's what we're asking for with these norms. Making space and taking space. Again, just noticing when you have the urge to step up and say something, or when you have the urge to hang back, and checking in about what that's about. And then calling in over calling out. To me, the difference between calling in and calling out is really just about compassion and about having the shared purpose of being in a community that's learning together. And so when we call in, we trust that we're here for the same reasons and we're wanting to learn in community, and that we're doing so in a way that has that we're connecting with some compassion. And then there's just the logistics. It's helpful if we stay muted unless we're talking, just for the background noise. And we love to see your faces if you have the bandwidth to keep your camera on. But going back to my original points, there's no judgment to have your camera off today or any day. Do what you need to do and do you. Relina, is there anything that I missed in these norms that you want to add?
That's perfect. And if anyone wants to add anything, please go ahead and add that in the chat. And then Megan, you can let me know afterwards. We can go back and highlight that norm. Those norms.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Relina.
Thank you. We also wanted to encourage those of you all who are on Twitter to please share your thoughts there. Josh, if you could pop both the Resilience Lab and the CCDE's handles into the chat. We have our wonderful graduate students, Sasha and Jazz, who will be live tweeting today, as well as Victoria at some points throughout the day. So amplify them, add your own thoughts. We would love to have that there as a record as well. So I'm going to just speak very briefly about the concept of radical listening. Radical listening is a central tenet of the Interrupting Privilege program from the center. And this came to us through our former PhD student, Anjali Brecky, who is here today. Hello, Anjali. She is currently an assistant professor of communication at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside. And while we initially brought people together to engage in dialogues, we did not have something that was as beautifully articulated as radical listening at the time. And you can see here, this is from an artist who has done some zines around radical listening, Sophia, and you can see where to go right there. And she says, radical listening is more than just waiting to speak your turn. So what is it? Like so many things, to understand what radical listening is, we can think about what it actually is not. What it's not is this process of the physiological process of hearing, right? Those of us who hear, the traveling of the sound waves. It's also not then the process of passive listening, or when you are just beginning to, but not fully making meaning of language. So for example, those of you all who have children and might have called their name time and time and time again, they didn't respond, and then all of a sudden they can respond and parrot back precisely what you said. It's in that kind of passive listening process that many of us, not just children, are often engaging in. So meaning making is really kind of still kind of inchoate there. Then from that process, many of you all probably heard active listening as absolutely the pinnacle of listening. And active listening is truly wonderful. It really is about holding somebody else's story. It's about fully making meaning of things. It's about thinking about how do you put your full intentions on your speaking partner. But in our critique of radical listening, what we talk about is how active listening doesn't actually take the questions of power into account. So, for example, active listening is often one of the things. If you learn about how to be a good active listener, they talk about eye contact. Well, we also know that eye contact is something that is impacted by gender. It's impacted by race, by culture, by religion. It's also impacted by disability. For example, folks with autism for whom making eye contact for extended periods of time is going to be difficult. Active listening also doesn't allow you to kind of think about silence and the role of silence. So not just what you're hearing, but what you're not hearing. Radical listening is trying to get us to tune into those silences. It's also trying to get us to tune into the way in which power is inflected interpersonally, structurally, historically, and is sitting all around us in all different types of ways. So my take on radical listening, building off of some wonderful scholars, including the critical education scholar Joe Kinchlow, who coined the term, is that radical listening is about slowing down. It's the process of slowing down to hear what a speaker intends is their meaning, not you, the listener, are filtering through with your own desires, not what you're hoping to hear. This enables the process of what the psychologist Jennifer Eberhardt describes as friction, right? That kind of the heat that might arise in your body, that discomfort that Megan named as part of our norms, that is also incredibly important because it's through the slowing down, it's through the discomfort that you can actually have a interruption of your implicit bias. But you need to slow down there. You need to slow down in order for that to happen. You need to invite in that discomfort. Radical listening is not about debate, and certainly not in that process of thinking about if someone else is speaking, I'm going to have the perfect response. I know exactly what I'm going to say, but rather holding someone else's words, even if it means you are not going to be equipped immediately to respond. When you ask questions, they are legitimately for additional information. They're for additional clarification. All the academics in the room, we are terrible at that. Most times spaces are about people trying to showcase exactly how brilliant they are through their questions or push a particular agenda. Radical listening means that we don't actually have everyone speaking equally all the time. And this is part of the make space, take space, that there are some people in our communities, in our culture, that we hear from all the time. We don't need to find out what their perspectives are because we hear them. We hear them in public policy. We hear them in our popular culture. We hear them in every way in which information is transmitted. And then there are others of us whose perspectives are not heard. And so radical listening is actually trying to give the mic to those underrepresented, minoritized folks who need to be heard from in different types of ways. And that means also grappling with silence. There's an action component to radical listening. So in the formulation of what we do with interrupting privilege, this is actually the first step. And then the last step, we go through many other steps, including discomfort and equitable dialoguing, in order to arrive at a place of intervention. So you don't just listen to a story or hear an experience of inequality and think that really has got, my heartstrings are pulled, but you think about how can we create change in an equitable, reciprocal way. And that's why action needs to be about listening to a speaker's desires, and how you, particularly for allies, how you might aid in that action and aid in that intervention, but that you're always thinking about the listening to them first. So it's not a top-down, it's very much a bottom-up approach. And then finally, this is not a neutral act. Radical listening in radical, that root really about power is about righting the wrongs of power inequalities. And so to hold this different way of listening as you enter into our the first of our 3 sessions for this conference today, and we're going to settle ourselves before we start listening with a practice from Marie Angelus.
I'd like to introduce Marie to all of you. Marie Angelus is a friend and colleague and the interim assistant dean of students and chair of the Equity and Inclusion Council in the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. Marie approaches her work with 4 values. 1, each person has a set of narratives, one that is given by society and one that they can create. 2, intersectionality and identity must always have a place in the work. 3, there is power and community in the individual. And 4, everyone's work is equity, inclusion, and social justice work. Marie, thanks for being here and leading us in the grounding practice.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that introduction, and Megan and Rolina for the invitation to start this conversation today. So again, my name is Marie Angelus. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a petite woman with brown skin, shoulder-length curly hair in my early 30s. And as Megan noted, I work here at the University of Washington. When I was considering the topic and the focus of today's session and the continuing conversations that you all will have around resilience and microaggressions, I immediately felt called to offer a somatic centering practice for this group. It is something I lean on often when I enter into work at all, or just even in my day-to-day life for care. And it's a practice that you can do alone or in a group. And it is one of the most fundamental building block tools of generative somatics. And I won't go into too much detail this morning about what that is, but I encourage you all to look into that if you are at all feeling responsive to the practice that I'm offering today. But with somatic centering practice, the most important piece about this is it's an opportunity to return to a home base within your own body and give space for any emotion or response you may have. And in doing so, we create more room for choice about how we want to respond and who we want to be in a moment. And I think especially when addressing microaggressions, we almost never respond from center, right? We have immediate reactions to everything. And there is power in responding from center. And with more practice, this becomes available to us to do. So I invite you to join in this practice. And again, you have choice here, whether you want to participate or whether you simply want to hear. And I invite you first to think about how you want to be in this practice. So you can do this standing or you can be seated. But ultimately, we want to be able to put ourselves in a position that has the most possibility for relaxing and relaxation. So choose that for yourself, whatever that may be at this moment. And as you settle into that, I want you to allow your feet to be right underneath your hip bones and to have your knees be bent. So soften at the knees. It's not about standing perfectly straight, right? It's just about finding some ease as you're standing or as you're sitting. Now, just start to focus on your breath. Just sit and notice that. And start to lower and slow your breath. We also often tend to hold tension in places like our hands, our shoulders, or our jaws. Give those some movement to let them relax more, to allow you to relax more into your shape. Again, for relaxation, for ease. Continue to lower and slow your breath. I want you to begin now by focusing on your length, the down and the up. I want you to drop into gravity and your lower body and lengthen your spine. Really sit and focus on the length of your body right now. In somatics, focusing on length offers us a connection to our dignity and our self-worth. So now we have a settling and a straightening happening. Check in to see with yourself if more breath can happen in your belly now. Continue to focus on breath. Now let's balance side to side in our width. Focus on balancing left to right, seeing how much space you might be able to take if you're in your chair or seated, or even as you're standing. See if you can open the chest a bit more than usual. Really live in this dimension of width, and the space your body can take. Feeling into this offers us connection, community, and interdependence. Width is also about reaching out, right? Now bring your attention front to back in the dimension of depth.
Yep.
Fill in. Feel the space behind you, inside of you, in front of you. Really sit with the depth you're holding. Focusing on depth can connect us to our past, our present, and our future. What holds us, what keeps us going, what we're striving towards. Now drop your attention to the belly center. This is about 2 inches below your navel. For some, it may be comforting to hold that belly center with your hands and just feel the breath that goes in and out of your center. Just notice what changes in your body when you do this to hold your center. Continue to focus on your center, your belly center. And now we will close by considering our purpose or commitment in the centering practice. As you feel all the parts of your body, your length, your depth, your width, and your belly center, what is it longing for? What's calling you in this practice right now? And if you do find a longing or you find a calling, say it to yourself out loud. I'm longing for. I'm committing myself to. I'm here today because I need, right? What is your body telling you? And when you're ready, I want you to take one last big breath in, right into your belly center. And start to open your eyes as you exhale. And that is the short practice on somatic centering for us to enter this day. I'd like to invite anyone to offer any feelings or reactions they had to this space. You're welcome to do so in the chat. Someone might assist if there's a way to unmute you if you prefer to do it that way. But if there's anything that came up for you in doing this, please share.
Thank you so much, Marie. My longing was definitely for rest. I felt that. Yeah, thank you. As Aggie says, this is a really grounding practice, and people are expressing lots of appreciation. Jacqueline talked about the length, width, depth piece. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And this is yeah, absolutely. This is a perfect way to bring us into our first radical listening. We are going to have the pleasure of hearing 2 of our incredible colleagues. Everyone that you're going to hear from today and tomorrow are a part of our think tank through this Resistance Through Resilience project. And they were incredibly generous with us and spent time coming in and having conversations about a variety of things pertaining to the ways in which they resist in everyday ways, the everyday oppression known as microaggressions, and what does resilience look like to them. So we are going to begin with these 2 incredible people, Dr. Val Kalei-Kanua, who is a teaching professor and assistant dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Washington, Seattle School of Social Work. Dr. Kanua considers herself a critical Indigenous feminist activist practitioner scholar with a focus on gender violence against women and children and the intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender and sexual identity. And Dr. Kanua was in conversation with Dr. Christina Sharp. Christina Sharp is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Washington on the Seattle campus. She specializes in interpersonal, family, and health communication, and primarily researches difficult family transitions and the ways that families cope with major disruptions to their lives. So we are going to listen to their clips, listen in any way that feels comfortable. As Megan said, this might mean taking notes for you. This might mean closing your eyes. And we're gonna go to the CCDE's Interrupting Privilege website for this. Josh will go ahead and put that link in the chat so that you can check these all out later. But I'm going to go and begin here. If we could ask everyone to please mute themselves. If you could please make sure that you're muted so we're not hearing other noises. And I'm going to start the clip, which is about a little less than 4 minutes. I'm going to start it right now.
One of the things that I feel, the reason I'm glad it's over is one of the things I kind of just feel irritated about right now is the sense of white privilege. And it's really like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong thing, these kind of things. But people say it about everything, right? I mean, anytime you're going to intervene in any kind of oppressive actions, people always say that, like, I don't know what to say if I see somebody, bullying somebody, or, people always say that, right? So I finally have taken up this call for all my mainly white students who are like, I just don't want to say the wrong thing, whatever. I said, there's just two things you have to do. You have to be brave and you have to be humble. That's it. In order to really confront and to resist oppression and injustice, you have to be brave and you have to be humble. I said, because you will say stupid things, you will make mistakes, and you just have to be humble enough to acknowledge and to make amends for what was hurtful or had an effect on others. It was not necessarily what you thought it would be. So, and I said, and the only reason you're going to do that is because you have to be brave. You have to stand up for something. But if you're always afraid you're going to say the wrong thing, then that's where the humility comes in, which is you will say the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And just be humble and say, wow, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. I've learned. I'm going to try not to do that again, whatever it is, right? And because I kind of feel like that is what resistance is about. It's a combination of having a sense of, it's about risk taking, right? But you can't be so vulnerable that you can't, so the worst thing to do is to say, is to not do anything. I said, that is not acceptable. You must do something, but it's how you react to when whatever you're doing is not received exactly as you thought. That's where we get into trouble, is when you get defensive, mm-hmm. or you start crying or whining. It's like, don't do that, okay? Because that's demeaning is actually even worse than being silent. So I just think that is, to me, what I try to hold on to is, to say I'm sorry, to learn, to try to not do that thing I did before, to ask questions. And I feel like that is how resistance happens. And the only way to be resilient is to be humble and to search right in your heart and your mind and your spirit to try to do what's best, and to not be perfect, but to do what's best. So I feel like that is, to me, what resilience is about. It's you're in it for the long haul.
I love that. Yeah, that like rings really true for me. Sometimes I say to my students, like, sometimes it might feel like the most important step is the first step, but like the most important step is the next step.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You have to keep on moving,
Mm-hmm.
Like,
mm-hmm.
getting started is important,
mm-hmm.
but like, there's going to be problems and there's going to be hurdles. And like, it's about making the next step every time,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even though it's scary, right? And even though we make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So I would like to invite Christina and Calais to to join us here. There you guys are. And invite you to say anything that you'd like while listening to that, anything that particularly struck you or anything that you'd like to share with the group here.
I guess just one thing I would say is that was just like a small clip of this conversation that I'm very grateful for. And just what a wonderful experience it was to be able to talk to someone about topics that are often hard to talk about otherwise or might not come up in your everyday life, and the gratitude I have for being able to have this conversation in the first place.
Aloha, everyone. This is Kale. I am of Hawaiian and Japanese ancestry. I'm about to complete my 71st circle around the sun, so I'm old. I have salt and pepper short hair, and while I was born female, I'm more non-binary in my gender appearance, and I do not have a preferred gender pronoun. I just wanted to say that I'm wearing a white t-shirt with an orange sweater, and my Zoom background is of Waipio Valley, which is a very sacred spot on the island of Hawaii, and a place that is seen as one of the source places of our people. And I just want to agree with Christina. Well, first of all, that was me talking a little bit too long, but as Christina said, we just had a really long, very rich, I think very vulnerable conversation that we have never met before. And it was it's hard to say what it was, but I think it's that the opportunity to connect, to relate, to share, and I guess that's really what resilience is about: connecting and sharing and being in community with one another.
I apologize. This is Christina. I should have provided a description. I am a woman of Asian descent. I'm in my 30s. I have long, dark hair. I'm wearing a dress with flowers on it. I just wanted to make sure I added that visual descriptor in. But yeah, I think that our conversation, there was an opportunity to be very vulnerable with someone like we had never met before. And that was also very empowering and liberating to be able to speak, for me, parts of my truth with someone who I didn't know.
And it's really, it's an incredible conversation. And if you listen to if you go to the CCDE's website, you can hear more of their clips. But really, these ones in particular, we wanted to share out because they just felt like guiding principles, really important guiding principles for life, both inside and outside of the classroom. And I thought that they're really just a wonderful pair to kick us off for our listening. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part and for sharing that. So next we have our second set of clips, and just to let you all know, because we're going to listen to 3 different sets of clips in this morning session. We are all going to stay here as one group. If you're able to come and join us for the afternoon session, we are going to, after we listen and after our speakers have a chance to speak, we're going to do some breakout groups for people to practice being in a process called serial testimony that I'll explain in the afternoon. We're going to just listen together as a big group here. So I'm going to hand it over to Megan, who is going to introduce our next 2 speakers.
Thanks, Rolina. And it's an honor to be able to introduce Kwan and Felix. I'll start with Felix. Felix Niels is the Director of People and Culture in UW's Advancement Division. He has worked close to 30 years in leadership, stewardship, and partnership capacities in industry sectors that span nonprofit, entertainment, technology, manufacturing, government, legal services, and consulting. He is a licensed mental health counselor, volunteers with veterans suffering from PTSD. He himself too is a veteran. And he is the first BIPOC male elected to the Snohomish City Council in their 163-year history of the town. Welcome, Felix. And I'd like to introduce Kwan. Kwan Russell is an access coordinator in the Disability Resources for Students Office, DRS, here at the UW. He is a co-leader and co-founder of the Disability Resources for Students Diversity Task Force, and he actively participates in many other social justice-oriented initiatives and committees on the UW campus. Kwan was recently introduced to the concept of mindfulness as a participant in a program called Be Real, which is a program that was authored and developed by the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing, and that the Resilience Lab supports. And Kwan participated in the Be Real training. And if you're interested in more information about that program, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to provide more information. Kwan and Felix, welcome. We're going to play your clip.
Okay, this clip is about 3 minutes long. I'm going to start it right now.
Like I look at, individuals like my mom, who is no longer with us. She passed years ago now. But like my grandparents, like people who, have just endured just so much, like growing up in like this racialized society and are alive and thriving in their own way, in spite of. And so, yeah, so when I think about resilience and when I think about resistance, like I think about them, I think about my two grandparents who grew up in the Jim Crow South, and I hear about all the different stories they shared with me about, going to integrated schools for the first time, or, interactions with law enforcement and blatant forms of racism, like, that were more prevalent back then. Literal, water fountains that were, white and black only and stuff like that. And like I said, and for them to have like made it to the point in their life where like they have, grandchildren and great grandchildren, like, in a society that, like I said, was bent on killing and destroying their life. Like that's the resilience and resistance that, like, I've looked up to and inspired to.
Well, but part of what you're identifying is the generational racism and the generational stories we have that says that there is still, while the circumstances may have changed, some of what happens is still existent. Mm-hmm. If we look back over time, there are other times where we can point to other racial strife, maybe not a pandemic, mm-hmm. but ask anyone who's been alive for the last 30 years, even if they didn't experience it directly, most people can understand and remember. If you say Rodney King, they know that name. If you say, certainly if you say George Floyd, they know that name now. Yeah. But every generation has a flashpoint and a story or an occurrence that becomes their siren song to trying to do something. Mm-hmm. And to trying to decide how they're going to rally around what those important points are. Maybe we don't march like we used to, but formatively speaking, we still coalesce around issues and make our voices heard. Mm-hmm. Hearing how people did it before is very important. Kuwan, you want to kick us off?
Oh, yeah, I was just waiting. I guess, yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. Thank you so much, Rolina and Megan, for allowing me this opportunity. I feel honored. And like Christina, I forget the other person that went with Christine, said, like, this was just a snippet of a very insightful conversation that I was able to have with Felix. So thank you, Felix, for all the wisdom that you imparted upon me. So in re-listening to the dialogue, I went and I actually journaled, because that's my main form of mindfulness. And I just want to share with you all what I wrote. So I said, when I personally think about the concepts of resistance or resilience, I feel like resistance is a lot easier for people to grasp onto, because you can see the actions of resistance, right? You can see the protests, the strikes, the boycotts, however that resistance, manifests itself in that moment. But resilience, you don't always see the everyday actions of resilience. And because of that reason, I feel like it's often taken for granted as more of a passive act, when in actuality, resistance is just as action-oriented, or even more so than resistance. Because when you think about resilience, resilience is the continuing to bounce back in the face of adversity, the continuing to navigate, adapt, transform within and around systems of adversity. And for people, living within marginalized identities, every day we simply show up and choose to get out of our bed, choose to survive, in spite of the exhaustion, the anger, the frustration. That's resilience. And I've learned that, my resilience through my embodied presence alone is enough a lot of the time, all the time.
Thank you, Kawan, for that. Felix, Niels here. I am a mocha-colored, proudly red and black person who has a grandmother on my mother's side who is half Cherokee, and a grandmother on my father's side who is half Seminole. I'm wearing a white shirt with a bowler tie that's been in the family for 75 years, which has coral and turquoise in it. Wearing a black jacket and a white shirt, short curly hair. And because Kawan and I connected right away, I also did some writing on reflection on this, which she's not surprised to hear. And I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to start by saying, one of the things I was struck by what was said before us and what I'm hearing now is, when you come together on something for which you're principally aligned on values, because there's something that matters to you formatively about what you want to do next, there is some shorthand that you have that says we already agree on some principally important things, which is why we can be vulnerable with each other. So I just wanted to, I think, was one of my reflections. And what came to mind for me was generational trauma, and how so much of what happens to us is a place where somebody has to find community. Community is the thing that's missing a lot of times, that makes it such that resistance through resilience is something we get. So whatever you do for community, I'm encouraging you to have community as part of the formative way that you find places to continue to spotlight the importance of whatever it is that allows you to be resistant and resilient. The whole idea of speaking about things, Marie Angelus in her exercise talked about being connected to the past, present, and future, and committing yourself to something and having longing for something. And I think that's an important thing to stay connected to, because when you have to make decisions about what matters, you have to be connected to something bigger than yourself to allow you to say, I have to press on. And so having said that, the only other thing I will say now is I wanted to give you a little bit of a snippet. This bowler tie I was mentioning is from my dad, who passed away 4 months ago. And he has a poem he wrote called Identity, of which I'll give you a very 15-second part of this, because I think it's very much about finding that inner peace and finding that inner strength. And so it goes as follows. It's called Identity. What you do and why you do what you do. When and how you do what you do as you do it to me. I feel without need to do to you. and who you say you are, and what you are and what you say you are as you say it to me. I listen without need to say to you what you say to me. I ignore the terror you eulogize. I erase the error you validate, and I will nail corrections over your lies. I look into your eyes and see without need to authenticate or to correlate who you are and what you are to who I am and what I am. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Felix, for sharing that. That really hit me. Oh my goodness. Wow. I just need a second. Whew, goodness. And I'm supposed to be leading a practice after this, so I'll go ahead and transition to that. And before I do, I just want to say that I completely forgot to describe myself, so I just want to do that. So Kawan Russell again, he, him pronouns, work here at UW in the Disability Resources for Students office. I'm a Black male in my early 30s, Black hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a two-tone sweater, turtleneck sweater, white and brownish. And yeah, so like I said, I'm going to go ahead and transition now into the exercise that I was asked to do. And of the many exercises I chose, or I learned from Be Real, I chose to do the self-compassion break because this is the one that I often find myself using the most in my everyday life, and including the moments I'm feeling less resilient. So before I go into it, there are 3 tenets to the self-compassion break that I just want to mention and name. So the first is acknowledging the difficulty. So I feel like so much of our life is downplaying various things that happen to us by saying that, oh, that was fine, or that's okay, or I'm good. When in actuality, what you experienced wasn't okay, and you're not fine, and you're not good. And so acknowledging that difficult situation, validating that for yourself is incredibly important. The second tenet is to remember that you're not alone and that others feel the same way or similar ways as you do about that situation or moment or whatever the case may be. And then the third tenet is just to extend kindness to yourself. And so I'm going to go through this exercise that's about 4 to 5 minutes long. And again, this is optional. Feel free to engage if you want or simply observe. And you can either close your eyes or maintain a soft gaze on whatever you're comfortable to do. So with that said, just take a moment to get comfortable wherever you're sitting. Perhaps inviting yourself into more of an awake position and sitting a little bit taller. Bring your focus to one place in the room, or soften your gaze if you wish, and take a moment to observe your breath. Now bring to mind a difficult situation that you were in recently, or a time when you felt a strong emotion. Maybe you felt overwhelmed by your workload, or had an interaction with a loved one or a peer that didn't go as well as you hoped. Once you acknowledge that moment of difficulty, you can say a simple sentence such as, "This was really stressful," or "This hurts." Just find a phrase that works for you and repeat it silently. Now find a way to connect with the common experiences that we all have, our common humanity. This could be a sentence such as, "I'm not alone. Other people have felt this phrase too, or felt this way too." Find a phrase that feels right to you and just repeat it to yourself silently. And for this last piece, it could be helpful to place a hand over your heart for extra grounding. A few other options people like are folding one hand over the other, or in their lap, or using one thumb to gently massage the other wrist or your arm. There might be something you do intuitively whenever you need support. And take a moment to just find that and what feels grounding to you. Now, extend kindness to yourself. Ask yourself, what do I need now? What do I need to hear? This might be a sentence such as, may I be patient with myself. Remember the rest I need to take. I am good enough. If it feels difficult to find a phrase, think about what you would say to comfort a friend who's going through a similar situation. And once you find a phrase, repeat it 2 or 3 more times to yourself silently. And whenever you're ready, shift your awareness back to the Zoom call. I'll end by saying thank you all so much for allowing me to share this practice with you. If it did anything for your spirit, I would encourage you to please share that in the chat. And lastly, I would encourage you to come back to this practice anytime you need to remind yourself to give yourself compassion or grace or patience or love, whatever you need for yourself. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Kwan. This is, I've never been a part of doing our listening, and then these moments, and I'm feeling like I'm really transformed by them. I really thank you so much. So we are going to move into our third and last set of dialogues here. We were joined here by Dr. Christina Fong, who is the Associate Dean for Inclusion and Diversity, and the William D. Bradford Endowed Professor of Management at the Foster School of Business at the University of Washington, Seattle. Dr. Fong's research and consulting interests include the study of emotions in the workplace, leadership development, impression management, power and politics in organizations, negotiations, and management education. And she is a valued colleague in so many different spaces, including our diversity leads group, where a number of us who do this work around the university get to meet together. And Christina was joined by her colleague, Andy Marzano, who is the Associate Director of Undergraduate Diversity Services for the University of Washington's Foster School of Business at UW-Seattle. In this role, Andy leads a small but mighty team of student services staff dedicated to recruiting and retaining a diverse undergraduate student body and creating spaces to support and empower business students of historically marginalized identities. So we are going to move to their dialogue, which is about 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. And I'm going to start it right now.
Yeah, and I guess I will just say, like, if I think about this idea of resistance through resilience. For me, one of the things that I find to be most difficult to give myself a break on is this idea of like being part of the system, you know. And I think so often about like when I'm hearing conversations, particularly from our marginalized students, these students will often say like, they don't want us to succeed here, or, you know, they don't care about what is happening to us, or they don't, you know. And it's, for me, those statements are really hard to process, because I am mindful of the fact that in many ways I am that they.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's really hard, for instance, for me not to start to feel defensive and say like, no, I care, and we're doing all these things. You're not getting the experience that you want, and that's not right. But I do feel like it's really hard for me to hear those things. And also I do feel, you know, a little bit like, who is this they, right? Like, I would love to know the they's names, because then maybe we could, you know, it just feels like it would be an easier action plan. But instead, the they is not really a they, it's a system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me, resilience, when like keeping in mind just the idea that some of these systems like historically have been based in eliminating kind of certain populations, literally, right? Think about like indigenous people, but then also like eliminating culture and kind of aspects of individuals' identities based on race or gender. I think resilience for me is at times as like straightforward as just like retaining that presence of your identity, or just kind of physical being in certain spaces. And so resistance through resilience, I think for the students, like you're talking about, like, because I feel that same thing where I'm just like, I know the work that I'm doing, I feel like I know where I'm focused and trying to do these things, but am I just getting paid by a system that is like, you know, perpetuating the problem? So there is a lot of feelings of like hypocrisy or confusion around that, but I do, I come back to just like for us even as well, like continuing to be in this space and advancing this work and changing the system from within, so that our work and the students who are interacting with us that we're referring to can continue to exist and succeed and thrive in this space. Like that is resistance and resilience to like just kind of an always like present pressure to eliminate in certain ways. And so yeah, it is, there's this like weird constantly kind of like feel of, am I enabling that system somehow too though?
Yeah.
I think Christina and Andy are going to join us here and share. I'm really having to, I realize that I'm transcribed on the PowerPoint and I'm identifying so much with so many of what all of our speakers are saying. So I'm trying to stay quiet so all of my comments don't come across. But tell us what came up for you all listening there, please.
Yeah, I'll start. But thank you, Relina. Thank you, Megan, and to the whole team for coordinating everything. My name is Andy Marzano. I was on that clip. I'm work at the Foster School. I'm a multiracial person of color in my 30s, cis male. I'm wearing of course, I'm wearing a branded Foster sweater because why not, you know? And I am in my office here at the business school. So yeah, I mean, I think one thing that came up for me, and I'm just echoing some of the other speakers, but I did really appreciate the conversation that I was able to have with Christina, and again, to the team for helping to facilitate that. And I think it relates to our conversation. I appreciate Christina for a lot of reasons, but because she's technically my boss, right? And so that can be a difficult dynamic to work within, but she's really good about creating space for myself and the students that we work with and care about, to have difficult conversations, and even conversations that are critical of the systems that we work in, like we were trying to address, because that can just be a really weird dynamic to try to operate within. We're working really hard, we're busy, and then it's like, wait, is our work unintentionally perpetuating some of these systems and inequalities? And so I appreciate the space that she creates and that this conversation helped us to have. And I just want to, Felix and Kwan, appreciated the comments on self-compassion, on finding community regardless of what your solution or next step forward is going to be, because I think that's been really critical for both of us in trying to understand this dynamic that we work within. So those were a few things that I thought of when listening again, and that I just say and like way too much. It's hard to listen for that reason, but otherwise I appreciated our conversation. So Christina. Okay.
Thank you so much, Andy. This is Christina Fong speaking, and I am a Chinese American woman in my mid-40s with straight black hair, but really it's gray, but it's dyed black. And my pronouns are she, her. I'll just kind of build on what Andy is saying and say, I also really appreciated the conversation that we had. I've appreciated being able to hear all of these conversations and practices. And I feel really grateful for this space. I do think that that, like many others who are probably in this Zoom call, that one of the things that I've really appreciated about working together with Andy is having that space to discuss what does it mean to be resisting and participating within one system, and the amount of resilience that is required to be able to persevere in the work while recognizing that, particularly there is something unique, I think, to being doing equity work within a business school, particularly now in times in which I think it's very clear that many corporations have contributed to the inequities that we see, and how do we help our students make sense of what they are learning in the business school? How do we help them feel proud of the fact that they will be graduating with business degrees, and also that their efforts to study in this space are not, how do we help them reconcile that with the other identities that they hold? I really appreciated the self-compassion practice. As a member of the UW Resilience Lab, I think self-compassion has really impacted the way in which I do my work, the way in which I teach, et cetera. And I thought it would be helpful to share that, that one of the sort of self-compassion mantras that I use to try to navigate myself through these periods of doubt, which I think are really healthy, is that progress matters, and that it's very difficult to sort of even be able to visualize what the end goal looks like, but that we are making a difference, we are making progress, and we each try, that to me helps me to continue to do the work every day. But I'm very grateful for this conversation. And another thing that matters is this community. So thank you for letting me be part of it.
Relina, you're on mute.
Hi there, of course. Thank you. I was just saying that, I one of the things I really appreciated in this and so many of the conversations, but really was your honesty and vulnerability. And I think you're absolutely right. This is something that we struggle with. I think I'm thinking about my graduate students who come in and have a real uncertainty about, is this the way to make and create change? And is it even possible for us to join a table that was never set for us, right? Are we ever able to change that? And so with that, I'm going to actually stop sharing here and invite all of our speakers first for the next couple of minutes to just share what you all might have heard with each other's clips, what this has kind of made you think about, just to provide any space for all of our speakers from today, for Calais and Christina Sharp, for Felix and Kwan, for Christina Fong and Andy, to just add to the conversation, and just wanted to open it up for a little bit, please. Please, Felix.
I didn't know how this worked, and I didn't want to step on anyone's words. Yeah, I had some other notes. I was really struck by the idea of the working within the system and trying to figure out how to leverage what you know about the system potentially to improve it or to be transformative in some way. Because there's so many things that happen there, but it's also important to give ourselves permission to be able to check in. Megan talked about checking in how you're doing what you have the bandwidth for, and I think because we are running so fast and we often feel like there's either metrics or other things that compel us to do things that may not be in line with where we know we need to be, or giving ourselves permission. It just matters a lot to me that we make sure to give ourselves permission. You know, there's in people and culture, we have started to look at concepts of organizational justice, the study of fairness in systems, and using those tenets as ways to try and take that and an equity lens to filter decisions through those particular strata, so that as we're trying to do things, we apply a rigor to it that elevates the importance of equity, belonging, but also allows there to be the space given by definition for things related to how we create places for people to be able to continue to be resilient, or to say the things they need and create the community they need. And I just really appreciated what I heard there about the systems part, about how we try to move things forward and how we can continue to work within the things we know that are much larger than us systemically. So thank you to the other speakers. I learned a lot from listening to all of you.
It's one of the things that struck me about what you said there was on permission. What does permission look like, and what does it mean to engage with in the spaces and places and that provide you with permission? Calais, please.
Thanks. What I wanted to say was, first of all, thank you for this really great opportunity for all of us to be together. And I think that, you know, the similar theme that I heard in all of these clips were twofold. One is the importance of being in community, either historically, you know, our ancestors were in community, we are in community. And I very much come from a culture of past, present, and future. And I know that the only reason I'm here is not for me, but because my ancestors have asked me to be here, and that I'm here for all the generations to come, 7 generations and beyond, to do the work for justice that I will never see the results of today, but that every day we work for that. But we do it not alone, not for ourselves, but for the communities that we represent. And even the communities, I always say it's for all the grandbabies and communities in the world ahead that I will never know. I hope that I will do them well for everything I'm doing now. And to me, that is really what resilience is, that we are always in there for the long haul, the road ahead, and the roads we will not ever travel on. So I really appreciate this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to name how I admire that so much, that kind of the long road ahead, and just how incredibly difficult it is to not see results, right? There was a reason in talking about Buffalo, and I was like, Megan, you do it. I can't do it today. But the constant reminders, and the everyday racialized violence, it makes it hard to remember our purpose. And those of us that are so deep in the work, as everyone in the screen, and I know that so many people who are here on this call are, to acknowledge how difficult it is, how exhausted we are, and to come back together in community, to find strength, because I'm finding strength in listening to all of you here. Thank you. We have a question here that from the CCDE. I think this might be from Jazz, coming to all of us. How do those of us who are not grounded in our cultures, growing up, access or sustain that connection to community? And with that, how do we define community? I'm wondering if anyone on the panel might have some answers to that. The first piece on defining community, and being able to then access and sustain it. And I hear that in really complicated ways. I'm wondering, Christina Sharp, I feel like your work speaks to this a lot. I don't know if you might want to say something. I see Felix as well.
No, please, Christina's got this. I'm sure I couldn't say anything better than she will, so I will mute happily.
I guess I would just say that, like, we're always a part of a community, and we're always becoming such that like we always have an opportunity to grow into new spaces and become new people, and like keeping that in mind, that like all of our interactions and all of our communication and all that we do is a part of who we're becoming and who we're growing, and the communities that we're also making, to like rest assured that you have a community, and that like you can grow into a variety of different things in a variety of different ways, and that a community is what you make of it, and that, you know, that there's nothing that could bar us from becoming and creating and growing. And so just grasping onto that invitational kind of spirit, that we can become who we are and with each other all the time, is the best that I have.
It's beautiful. That was wonderful. Yeah, the becoming spirit. Felix, did you want to add to that?
It'll be much more layman's, but I use an example sometimes where I say, if anyone who's ever been to a sporting event of any sort, you're sitting on the sidelines with a person, let's say it's at a Sounders game because we know they're doing really well. They get that score to win the game, and you're high-fiving the 90-year-old woman to your right and the person you never met to your left. And you want to know something? You've created something because you all cared about something. You brought energy to something that allows you to say formatively, without knowing anything about you, I know something that matters to you. It's the same with community. Volunteerism. What matters to you when you volunteer? What kind of things are you finding that people are like-minded with you on? And how does that create a pathway for you to stay connected in some way to the things that principally you said were the places where you don't have to talk about why that's important to us at the beginning? Eventually, we might talk about how it becomes something where it's different in the way we express it in our lives, but that's what intersectionality, dimensionality, and experience is all about. So I invite people to think about that as well.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you, everyone. By way of closing, as we're approaching noon, I just want to offer some words that I heard over the last 90 minutes, starting with radical listening, Marie offering us different notions of width and depth and length. I heard Kale and Christina talking about humility and bravery and resilience as taking the next step. Felix and Kwan talking about the past and the present and the future, and I'm holding on to the love and the wisdom, Felix, of your father and his words and his poetry. Kwan and self-compassion, having mindful awareness, self-kindness, connecting to that common humanity. And then Christina and Andy talking about who is they, I'm they, how do we push against the system that we're in and talk about the system that we're in, and then coming back as a large group, again, reconnecting to this notion of community. This session is beyond the depth that I could have ever imagined. I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you and for all of you to engage with us in this way. I hope that for those of you who are here, that you'll join us in an hour for our afternoon session. We're going to hear a dialogue between Jazz and Lanisha. Tanisha Valdez will offer us another practice that's meaningful for her, as well as Sasha, our graduate student assistant with the Resilience Lab, to offer a practice as well. And we'll engage in a process of serial testimony where you'll be invited to be in conversation with each other as well. So we look forward to seeing you in an hour. And then tomorrow, we will return at 5 o'clock in the evening, this format as well on Zoom, to be in conversation with these four wonderful colleagues and friends as well, Aggie, India, Marcia, and Jay. So we hope that you're able to join us tomorrow between 5 and 6, and looking forward to seeing you. Thank you, everybody. Deep gratitude, respect, and appreciation.